Hello, this is Dr. Ilker Kalender from Bilkent University, Turkey. In this presentation, I'm gonna talk about effect of socioeconomic status on career-related variables across several countries based on the last PISA cycle, PISA 2018. For this study, I used two different SES, socioeconomic status variables, one student SES and school SES. I examined the interaction between these two variables and the effect of this interaction on career-related variables. As a researcher from Turkey, let me give you brief information about my country. Turkey actually is a founding member of OECD since the beginning, since 1960, along with the other 19 founding members. Turkey is a country located on two different continents, Asia and Europe. The capital city of Turkey is Ankara, the city where Turkey has a population of 84.1 million. So its young population, people aged less than 15 as described by OECD, constitutes its 23% of its whole population, which is larger than OECD average when we consider all OECD countries. And these are the performance indicators of Turkey in the last cycle of PISA 2018. When we consider math, reading or science, we can say Turkey performed worse in terms of average. The black lines on the graph shows OECD average and the red line shows Turkish boys' performance. I used here only boys, but the girls are no different in terms of performance. When we consider NEET, youth not in employment, education nor training, Turkey's average is significantly larger than OECD average, as we can see by comparing red and the black lines on the graph. After this brief information, I want to talk about socioeconomic status, the main variable for this study. As we all, or at least most of us will agree, socioeconomic status is an important variable strongly associated with student achievement. Students coming from low socioeconomic families usually have limited access to qualified teachers, quality school, or other educational resources as compared to their peers coming from high socioeconomic families. Quality career planning and development, the focus of this conference, unfortunately, is not an exception. Like many other variables, access to career planning and development opportunities is related with socioeconomic status. Better schools offer better guidance for their students. This expected relationship between SCS, socioeconomic status, and access to quality education may become more complex when we consider school socioeconomic status composition. We know that a student coming from a high socioeconomic family registered in a low SES school may be affected adversely. The opposite is also true. A student coming from low socioeconomic status family may benefit positively when he or she is in a high socioeconomic school environment. In other words, school and students' socioeconomic status may create an interaction. Examining this interaction may provide significant information to us on career-related issues for students. Thus, in this study, I analyzed the interaction between student SES and school SES and the effect of this interaction on career-related activities. As I said earlier, for this study, I used a data set coming from the last PISA cycle, PISA 2018. 79 countries and economies participated in the last cycle of PISA. It included 600,000 students, representing about 32 million 15-year-old students in schools across different countries. In PISA, as you know, socioeconomic status is defined as, I'm quoting, the relative position for the family or individual on a hierarchical social structure based on their access to or control over wealth, prestige, and power. Actually, socioeconomic status is a measure of students' access to family resources, financial, social, cultural, or human capital. Socioeconomic status is also an indicator of the social position of students' family. PISA dataset has a special index called Economic, Social and Cultural Status (ESCS). This index or this variable is basically constructed on three components: parents' education, parents' occupation, and index, an index summarizing a number of home possessions. Of course, there are some other subcomponents for each one. This variable has a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1, so that we can easily compare socioeconomic status across different countries or different units across in a country. Let me give a brief summary about the relationship between socioeconomic status and achievement in PISA. Publications by OECD show that across OECD countries, 1 unit increase in socioeconomic status creates an increase of 37 points in reading assessments. Reading was the main focus of the last PISA cycle. There is an 89-point difference in reading achievement between socioeconomically advantaged and socioeconomically disadvantaged students. In terms of reading achievement, again, 12% of the variation in students' performance within each country was associated with socioeconomic status. In other words, socioeconomic status itself can explain 12% of student achievement in reading. As I said earlier, I used two SES variables in this study, student SES and school SES. The literature shows that student SES, student socioeconomic status, is related with achievement. This is well established from both PISA data and from many other studies. In addition to that, school SES or SES composition of schools is also a predictor of student achievement, and this predictive power of school SES may be stronger than we thought on student achievement. The literature shows that, again, school socioeconomic status is still related with achievement even after student SES is controlled for. I used educational career questionnaire for this study, an optional instrument in PISA 2018. This questionnaire actually was designed to collect information on different aspects related with educational career, such as students' preparations, support with language learning, interruptions in schooling, etc. 31 countries took this optional questionnaire, so data for this study came from these 31 countries using this instrument optionally on their students. I selected 3 items from this questionnaire for my analysis. First item I selected, I spoke to a career advisor at my school. This is a yes/no question. The second one is a similar one. I spoke to a career advisor outside of my school. Similarly, this is also a yes/no question. And the third item is how to write a resume or a summary of my qualification. This is a selection item. If students think that they acquire this skill at school, they should select this item. Otherwise, they should leave the item unselected. Let me explain my design. I designed this study as an exploratory one. My first variable, student socioeconomic status, was already defined by PISA dataset. This is already there. I defined school SES by taking average of students' SES in each school separately within each country. Then I created socioeconomic status quartiles for both schools and students within each country. By this way, I obtained cross tabulations of 4 school and 4 student SES groups. In other words, I created 4 times 4 tables for each country. I divided these tables into 2 according to student responses, yes and no, for each country who took educational career questionnaire in the last cycle of PISA. In each table, I calculated percentage of responses. I considered the cells not in the diagonals, as these cells represent students who are in a different SES level than their school SES level. And then I calculated differences of percentage between 2 response options, and I analyzed this difference between yes and no options for each country descriptively. After that, I also tried to cluster countries based on their difference between yes and no options. Although I started with 31 countries, I saw that some countries have non-zero diagonals in my cross tables. Diagonals in my tables represent matches between school and student SES. Countries with non-zero diagonals represent countries with differences between yes-no options for the item, even if a student and a school in the same quartile. In other words, when students and schools are matched. After removing such countries, there were 15 countries less, and this is the histogram showing these 15 countries. These countries have no differences between yes and no options when there is a match between student and school SES levels. The mean of the histogram, mean of the differences, is almost 6.5, but median may be a better indicator for this histogram because this is a skewed distribution. 5.5 is the median of the differences between yes and no options within each country. Iceland has the largest interaction between school and student SES for this item. The item is, I spoke to a career advisor at my school. Students who have differences between their school SES and their family SES have the largest differences in terms of yes and no options for this item. Denmark and Slovak Republic was the other two countries with differences larger than 10%. Using hierarchical cluster analysis, I tried to group countries based on their responses for this item. 15 countries were divided into 3 groups. In the first group, there are 11 countries. In the second, there are only 3. And Iceland is the only country in the third cluster. Average differences between yes and no options for these countries can be seen at the top of each column. Iceland, the single country in the last cluster, has the largest difference. It is 23%. 3 countries, Denmark, Slovak Republic, and Italy, they were grouped under the same cluster, and they have a mean of 10% in terms of their differences. And the other countries in the first cluster has mean of only 4%. Here we see the 15 countries on the world map according to their clusters. Each color indicates a different cluster. Iceland, as we know, is a separate cluster involving only one country. Unfortunately, putting the countries on a world map did not reveal any geographical pattern, but this doesn't mean that there are no patterns across the countries. This is the histogram for the second item, students who spoke a career advisor outside the school. This time there are 20 countries with no zero difference between yes and no options when there is a match between students and schools in terms of socioeconomic status. Mean of the histogram is 6.6 in average, but again median can be a better indicator, which is 5.6. Croatia, Belgium, United Kingdom and Ireland were the countries with differences above 10% for this item. This time cluster analysis revealed 2 clusters of countries, and there is an almost 6-point difference between these 2 clusters in terms of differences between yes and no responses. 13 countries in the first cluster have a mean of 4.5 in average, while the 7 countries in the second cluster have 10% difference between yes and no options in average. Again, geographical locations of the countries with respect to their clusters can be seen on this world map. There are 2 clusters, each color represents a different cluster. Again, there is no clear pattern in terms of geographical distribution of the countries, but we can say most of the countries are in Europe. And this is the last histogram about learning how to write a resume or summary of qualifications at school. This time we have 21 countries with no difference in responses when there is a match between students and schools in terms of socioeconomic status. Median of the histogram is almost 7% with a maximum of 13% approximately. Iceland, New Zealand, Costa Rica and Denmark are the countries with the largest differences 10% or above for this item. Again, countries were grouped under 3 clusters with 4 or 5 point difference between them in average. In the first cluster, we see 8 countries with a mean of around 7%. Second cluster includes 9 countries with 3.5%, and the last cluster with 4 countries. has the largest average difference, which is above 11%. Here again we see a world map showing countries within each cluster using a different color. This time countries are more scattered around the world as compared to what we got for the other two items. Let me talk about implications. The interaction between school SES and student SES created 5 to 6% difference in average in 3 career-related I used in this analysis. But when we look at the figures in detail, differences between yes and no options go up to, for example, to 23% in Iceland for the item I spoke to a career advisor at my school. In Croatia, we see almost 14% difference for the second item. I spoke to a career advisor outside of my school. And for the last item, learning skills required for writing a resume or a summary of my qualifications. For this item, we have a difference 13%, again almost 13% in Iceland. Differences may not seem so high within countries, but let's remember what matters is students, not the percentage. When we converted percentage into real numbers, the situation may seem more serious. Clearly, the results show that there are students out there in different countries who need appropriate career-related help, and this difference between students seems to occur because of differences socioeconomic status of students and schools. There are no achievement differences in none of the domains measured in PISA, reading, science, and math between countries grouped under different clusters for the 3 items I used in this study. Thus, career-related activities should be handled in schools and or countries regardless of student achievement. And the last slide. As this study was designed an exploratory descriptive study, no inferential analyses were conducted, but using robust statistical analysis may reveal additional findings or additional patternal information. This is one of the recommendations I would like to make further analysis. In addition to that, patterns can be sought across clusters. Different pattern analysis can be conducted based on, for example, geography, economy, etc. In this study, I used absolute differences to examine how students differ in terms of their responses to career-related variables because of the school and students' interaction within each country. Further studies again can be designed to examine these differences in different ways to have additional or new information about the interaction between school and students SES. Thank you very much for this excellent opportunity to present my findings in this conference. Thank you very much again.